Sometimes the song beats the ground. Another day, another way. Sometimes the rain it falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way.
To get into our discussion, let me remind our listeners that any information you hear in this podcast or read in blogs or references in the show notes is for education and entertainment only. This is not financial advice. Seek a professional expert for your unique facts and circumstances if you need financial advice. Hi, this is Lambo, and this is the FILIGHTERS podcast. Today we welcome Dr. Jordan Grumet back for his second time. Jordan's last time on the podcast was episode 15, back in July of 2022, when we discussed his previous book, Taking Stock, a hospice doctor's advice on financial independence, building wealth, and living a regret-free life. Today, we'll dig into his latest book, The Purpose Code, How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy. It's scheduled to be released on January 7th, 2025. Jordan, with that, say hello to our audience, and we're glad to have you here today.
I am so glad to be back, and I'm excited to talk about all things purpose.
Well, I will say the Purpose Code is something I have a lot of interest in. I don't know if you're basically close to 10 years younger than me, but I'm 61 and 5 years into an early retirement. The last 5 years, COVID kind of put a real blur on the beginning of it, but finding purpose is something that I think a lot of early retirees struggle with. Something that anytime I see an opportunity to learn more and read more, I add it to the stack of the books behind me, and I very much welcome this one as not being so much financially driven, but more on the softer sides of retirement, and not only just retirement, but how do you live your life with purpose? So I'm really glad that you focused hard on purpose in this book.
I'm excited to talk about it. I think purpose is really important. And you said those magic words. You said find purpose, which is my favorite statement because I always tell people you don't find purpose, you create or build it. So again, I'm looking forward to digging in.
Yes. I was so glad that I no longer had to pursue my purpose because we're going to talk about something later called anchors, and I'm going to set a few of those, and they'll head me the right direction. So,
For sure.
So let's talk a little bit about why you wrote this book, and really if there was something you learned out of the experience on your last book that really precipitated this book being created.
There certainly was. As you know, I went into medicine, eventually found out that didn't necessarily suit me, and started trying to figure out what life looked like if I was to step outside of being a doctor. Now, I was lucky. My parents modeled great financial behavior, so I had financial tailwinds. And so I decided to start getting rid of the things I didn't like in my job. And I was left with hospice work, which I did for 10 hours a week. But then I had to decide what to do with the rest of my time. I started a financial blog and podcast, and I was speaking to my financial people about all this important stuff, like how do you build wealth? But a lot of times they couldn't tell me their why or what enough looked like. And that's why, of course, I wrote my book, Taking Stock, What the Dying Can Teach Us About Money and Life, because I thought the dying actually had some answers to these questions. And a big premise of that book, Taking Stock, was that basically we should put purpose, identity, and connections first, and then build a financial framework around it. And so I went to market this book, and I went to all sorts of conferences and gave a bunch of talks. And at the end of these talks, people would come up to me, and occasionally people would be angry. And the first time this happened, I thought it was a one-off, but then it happened over and over again. And they'd all say something very similar. They'd say, you're telling me to find my purpose, and that's great and all, but I've been looking for my purpose forever. I can't find it, and it's really frustrating me. Will you please stop telling me to find my purpose? So, of course, being me, I went and did a deep dive into the literature, and I found two things that seem to contradict each other. So one, almost all of the studies show that having a sense of purpose in life increases your health, longevity, and happiness. Very, very clear. Tons of
We
studies.
all want those things, don't we?
We all want those things. And if someone could give you a simple pill and get you all of that, we'd be really excited for it. But I also found studies that showed that in up to 91% of people, they actually get something called purpose anxiety at least some point in their life where this idea of purpose actually makes them frustrated and depressed and angry. And so this was a paradox. And what I eventually realized is it couldn't be both. Like it couldn't be the most important thing as well as the most anxiety provoking thing, but it actually is. And the reason it is because purpose is probably not one thing, but two. And one of those things is more associated with kind of that stress and anxiety, and the other is more associated with this health, happiness, and longevity. And that's why I wrote the Purpose Code to pretty much show people the different types of purpose and also show that purpose doesn't have to be something ephemeral, pie in the sky, difficult to ascertain, but can be something simple and tactile and easy, something all of us can do.
Right, right. You get that. You hit the readers over the head right out of the gate with something you call big P purpose and little p purpose. But I thought hard about the big audacious goals you mentioned. We always had BHAGs at the office when I was working in the corporate environment, but a lot of times you feel like your purpose has to be something of significant magnitude to really matter. And you really have twisted that and said, hey, listen, it's not about these big goals. Tell us a little bit more about big P and little p, and what do you mean by that?
That's exactly right. Basically, that kind of anxiety provoking purpose, I think, is what I call big P purpose. That's big, audacious purpose. If you think in the United States, right, we have the saying, if you can think it, you can build it. Well, we have these grand ideas of purpose, like becoming billionaires, curing cancer, traveling to the moon, becoming president. That's wonderful. But the problem with big, audacious, big P purpose is that it's incredibly hard to achieve. You have to be the right person at the right time, saying the right things with a lot of luck and the right genetics. And most of us don't have all those things. So we're setting ourselves up to fail. A lot of these things are all or nothing. Either you succeed or fail. And so it's very scarcity mindset oriented. It's very much winner take all, right? Only one person can be president. If your goal is to be president, there's going to be one winner and lots of losers.
Yeah, and I think another point you make is ultimately, even if you achieve the big goals,
Yeah,
loss
it doesn't.
aversion rapidly steals all the joy out of that achievement.
Yeah. Yeah. And here's the problem. So if you don't enjoy the process of doing what you're doing, even if you reach that goal, you spent 95% of your time in the process. And if you don't like the process of doing it, you only enjoy that goal for so long. And then, like you said, you either get scared of loss aversion or you just habituate back down to your baseline level of happiness. And then you're trying to double down and do an even bigger goal.
Yeah, I always go back to Dorothy on the Yellow Brick Road. Life happens on the road, not at Emerald
Yeah,
City. So the
exactly.
whole process is really part of the joy, or needs to be part of the joy, and that is the experience that we all undergo as we're pursuing these things that we think is our goal. Uh,
Yeah, and that's little p purpose is the process, right? Just to kind of finish out the story. If big P purpose is goal oriented purpose, little p purpose is process oriented purpose.
Big P, basically, we say it's goal oriented, scarcity mindset oriented, highly fallible, lacking agency, all or nothing, and it generally leads to anxiety and disappointment. And here's the reason why. Basically, big P purpose is really, really hard to achieve. And so, as I was saying, if you're not the right person at the right time with a lot of luck and the right genetics, and there's so many things that have to align. And the problem is, you don't have control over all of them. So it leads to that feeling of helplessness and disappointment. And that's that purpose anxiety that up to 91% of people get at some point in their life. It's that feeling like there's this big thing out there. And if I could just grasp onto it, I'm going to be happy. But I don't even have the power to grasp onto it. And let's think about this too. Why do we think big P purpose is so important? Look at the images social media and marketing are sending to us. These images of six-pack abs and wearing the finest clothes and traveling to all
right.
these different countries and running an eight-figure business. I mean, they're trying to sell us something, but the way they're trying to sell us it is by having us co-opt this version of big P purpose that's going to hook, line, and sinker get us to spend money on them.
Right, right. And I know you talk later in the book about the social media impact on so many of us. That unreal expectation that they present becomes your need to achieve that level of a goal. And it can't be healthy.
And it doesn't even light us up. Think about it. Most of us really, when it comes down to it, don't want six-pack abs. We don't want to eat what you need to eat to do
I
that.
ain't got them.
We don't want to exercise to we don't want to stay away from alcohol. We don't want to like all the things that they're selling to us. Do most of us really want to travel around the world? It sounds fun, but have you ever tried traveling for 60 or 90 or 120 days straight? It's pretty exhausting.
Right.
They're trying to sell us on a version of purpose that serves them, but most of these things probably don't really light us up.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's a key point. The little p on the right side of that graphic, let's talk about the positives a little bit. This is where we get back to the process-oriented, abundant mindset. It's impossible to fail, incremental gain, and longevity and health. I'm a huge believer in these things, and these kind of make me, you can see me smile literally.
I was
on
about
the
to say,
screen.
don't you smile as you think about it? And here's why you're smiling. Maybe because it is all positive, but ultimately what that really feels like is agency and control over your life. That feels like I don't have to wait for this big purpose thing to hit me on the head and reveal itself so I can live a good life. It feels much more like, oh, there are things I actually have control over and I can do. And there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which is feeling good and being healthy. And it sounds too good to be true, but I don't know if anyone's ever broken down purpose this clearly. And that's why no one feels like it's that they can grab onto it the way I think we can.
Yeah, I've just reached over my shoulder and I picked up the last journal I had in my corporate job. And in the back of this, I have like 5 items were my goals for retirement. And I can tell you some of them were big, audacious goals. And none of those have happened. None of those have happened. But some of the ones that were much more little p oriented, I read your book and I'm like, I can give myself some credit for these little things. These
And the little
things.
things matter too. So you were in corporate America and you probably did lots of things that affected a lot of people and you had these big goals. And maybe if you had reached those big goals, maybe you could have this kind of big impact and legacy you're looking for. But here in retirement, you're doing things that light you up. And for instance, when you do a podcast like this and you bring important guests on and they say things that can help people, you're actually impacting lots and lots of people. You're creating impact and legacy, but you don't think of it that way because you're like, well, I'm just doing this thing I like that lights me up. But that's what attracts other people to you. That's why, for instance, when I'm like, oh, my new book's coming out, who do I want to talk with about this? I want to talk with Lambo about this. So what do I do? I email
reached out. Yeah. I was really surprised when I saw that hit my inbox. And I said, there's like this network of people, and I correspond with Joe Saul-Sehy, which of course you work closely with in a lot of things, and some on Paula Pant and some others. And I'm like, there's a network of people, and when you think of something, you think of that person.
That's because what you've done is when you get involved with Little P Purpose and you do things that light you up, other people notice who have similar interests, and they become your connections and community. And that's where you change the world.
Right. It's kind of, humorous, but I literally printed your book out on the back of another pre-release copy of Sean Mullaney's solo 401k plan.
Yep. I've read that twice, I think. Yeah.
And it's a good book. And, but, I thought, maybe talking to authors is something I really enjoy. And I don't know if you can see this stack of books behind me, but this is, of course, the one of the best ones. And
awesome.
Then, this lady pretty well.
Yes, I love that book.
I'm reading that one now, and of course, this other one, Stack's a good one. That's one space of the retirement lifestyle. What you're focused on in this book is a completely different space. Let's get back to the book here, because there's something in chapter 3 I really liked. You talk a little bit about younger children. They don't know it, but they have this moment in their life where they don't have any purpose anxiety because they don't understand what a big, hairy goal is. And
they just go play cops and robbers or play baseball or collect baseball cards or do marbles or whatever it is they do.
They're living in the moment and they're living in the process. And that's where little P lives.
Yeah. And another word I love to use when we're talking about that is it's flow. This concept of flow, when you're deeply engaged in something that's really important to you and you lose track of time and you forget about even the goals and you're just into the moment, some of the most fantastic, happiest people spend more time in flow than not. And it's not that you can't be impressive. Like Michael Jordan was really impressive, one of the most impressive basketball players, but that guy spent a lot of time in flow. Yes, he wanted to win, But I think half the time he wasn't even thinking about winning. He was just in the moment doing it.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
his feet didn't even touch the ground.
exactly.
He would just
And
move through the
and
court like
that's
it was
little
on
P purpose.
rails.
He might have
Yeah,
told you he wanted to be the best basketball player ever, but that guy was going to play basketball even if he didn't win. He was going to play
right,
basketball no matter what.
right. I really like the I guess the innocence of the young children and that
Yeah.
analogy there. Also in that chapter, you talk about the influences of family and those influence and how they can maybe even limit your perspective on your own goals and potential. And I had to look back and I started thinking about a lot of relationships because you do this a lot in the book, right? You talk about the impact of multi-generational relationships and how so many things are passed down,
Good,
you know,
good
and
and
I
bad.
can, yeah, and I can remember being told, or not really being told, but it's like nobody ever said, "Hey, you can be anything," you know, that's possible, okay? And I know that those are things that we have to escape.
Yeah. And it's not just telling. What we really need is our kids to see us doing these things. Like, what better way to really teach your kid that they can do anything than for them to see you deeply engaged in little P purpose and you doing the thing yourself? Because that's really the model. That's what I call generational growth. Suppose
Right,
generational trauma, which gives them limiting beliefs and tells them they can't do things. I want to show them that I am enlivened by these
right.
things that I do, that it makes me shine, and that when they become adults, they should be doing the same exact thing. I'm giving them permission. They don't have to fit into what society tells them they need to do. They don't have to be the doctor, the lawyer, the CPA, but by
Right.
all means, if you love that stuff, go for it. But I want to give you permission to do whatever the hell you want.
That's right.
And
That's right. You being the doctor and me being the retired CPA, we got them all
yeah,
covered.
yeah.
Because believe me, that was not the joy in my career. The joy really happened much later. In the last 6 years of my corporate career, I wasn't even in the accounting or financial areas, and I was doing stuff I really loved.
Yeah, and
But
it just took a while to get there.
yeah,
Same with me. So I'm the same story. Like I really burned out of medicine, but by the end, all I was doing was hospice, which was something I loved. And this speaks to the fact that you can pick a job that isn't perfect for you, but over time, as you get older and more skilled and you start using the different tools and levers in your life, you can take that
right.
thing you don't love and start building in purpose into it. And both you and I did that in our careers. We built purpose into our career.
Another key thing that you talk about a lot is the art of subtraction, which you've lived, and you talk about it in the book as well. Talk a little bit more about how do you take where you are. Let's say things aren't great in your job, and what can somebody do?
So here's the thing, and this is a long answer, and I apologize, but I think it's an important one. Here's my concept of life and winning the game. Basically, we're given a set amount of time on this earth. From the day we're born to the day we die, we have no idea how much it's going to be. Yes, we can wear our seatbelts and eat well and do some things that make it a little longer, but you're given a set amount of time, and here's the problem. You can't buy time, you can't sell it, you can't trade it, you can't do anything with it. It
Unrenewable
passes.
resource. Once it's
It
spent, it's gone.
and it's not even you can't spend it. It just passes. It
Yeah.
is a constant that you have no control over. So the only thing you can do one thing. You can control some of the activities you're involved in as time passes. And so here's what winning the game looks like. If we look at our life as broken into these time slots, let's call them days, months, years, I don't care what you call them. Winning the game is using those time slots and filling them as much as possible with stuff you love, like Little P Purpose, and getting
Right.
rid of as much stuff that you loathe as possible. And so that's how you win the game over time. But the problem is you don't start perfect, right? When you're young, you got to make money. You often do jobs you don't like. So there's a lot of stuff you either
Right.
are mediocre on or love, and less stuff you love that you don't love, and less stuff that you love. But here's the idea. In order to improve this calculus and in order to improve our schedule, we have some tools and some levers that can help us live more of a life of purpose and do less things we loathe. So everyone sticks on the one thing, which is one tool, which is money.
That's right. It's just one.
Everyone thinks that that's the only tool we have. And it is true. If you have a lot of money, for instance, you can hire someone to clean your house. So instead of cleaning your toilet bowl on Saturday and Sunday, someone else
Right.
is doing it. And then you can fill that time with other more appealing stuff. So money is a great tool. But the mistake people make is they think it's the only tool. We actually have
Right.
tons of other tools. We have our youth, we have our energy, we have our passions, our joys, our skills, our families, I mean, our communities. We have tons of things.
Right.
And we can use those tools and then what I call levers. So the levers, there's three big ones. One is the joy of addition, the other is the art of subtraction, and the last is substitution. So let me show you what this looks like. Let's say you're 22 years old and you don't like your job at all and you're working 50, 60 hours a week.
Specifically, let's talk about the guy that does the bicycle repair. He's a great
Yeah,
example. He's in the
perfect.
book.
He's in the book, didn't like his job. The only job he could get was for a non-for-profit out of college, wasn't even what he wanted to do. We were working really long, hard hours, and he was exhausted. And he read my book, Taking Stock, actually, and he came to me and he said, yeah, this sounds great, but I don't have time or the energy to build purpose in my life. And so what I did with him is I started really talking to him. I'm like, okay, what could purpose look like in your life? And we realized that he didn't have a lot of tool of money, but he did have some other tools. His youth and his energy, he wasn't married yet, he didn't have a mortgage. There were all sorts of things he had going for him. And we decided that he could use the joy of addition, one of those levers, and he
Right.
could add in some purposeful activity a few hours on the weekend. So think about this. Already we're improving his life because if you look at his calendar, he had no purposeful activities there. He had only work which he hated, but now we've added 3 or 4 hours of purposeful activity in his life. That purposeful activity, based on a purpose anchor, something he loved during childhood, was bike racing, and he learned how to fix his bike because he didn't have money to have someone else do it. And he still loved bike racing, and he still knew some people in the competitive bike racing field. And so he started showing up to different races and offering to repair other people's bikes. A lot of these young riders, they would have a problem with their bike, and he would be on site and he'd say, look, I'll do it for a little fee. I'll fix it up and we'll get you right back out. And he did
Yeah.
that for 6 months. And so he was using the lever of the joy of addition by doing something purposeful. But what happened after 6 months, interestingly enough, is this tool, which was his skill set and his passion from childhood, turned into a little bit of money. He actually made
Yeah.
some money doing this. He became the go-to guy at all these races to fix your bike when you needed it done quickly. And he
Yeah.
made enough money that he took his 9 to 5 that he hated and started working 4 days a week instead of 5. And so now he's got a little bit more of that tool of money and he's got a little bit of margin and he used the art of subtraction, another lever, to get rid of something he loathed, which was his job. Let's say that wasn't good enough and he pushed really hard and he still couldn't make more money on his bike repairs, but his parents happened to live in the same town. So then he could give up his rental apartment and use the tool of his family and his connections to live with them, not pay rent. And all of a sudden he has a little more money. So maybe he can
Right.
use the art of subtraction and work 3 days a week. And so what we're seeing here is even if you don't have a lot of that one tool of money, you have these levers and tools. And every time you either add on a joyful activity or subtract out something you loathe, you're making that calculus of your calendar better. You're winning the game because that time, which we have no control over, you're adding in more joyful things and taking out more things you don't like. And it's wash, rinse, and repeat over and over again. Use those tools and levers that you have, and let's incrementally make your life better. And if you start this in your 20s, I guarantee when you're in your 40s or 50s, and certainly when you're retired in your 60s, you're going to live a life full of little p purpose, and very few things that you don't like are going to be on that calendar.
Right, right. And I like the point you make about, when you're in your 20s, and I have a group of listeners that are 20s and 30s, and I've got a group of listeners that are more like retirees. But those, particularly the ones that are my kids' age, that are starting their careers, working in their lower management levels, and you realize that there are things you can change. And if you potentially have FU money, because,
Yeah.
after working for 8 or 10 years and they really aren't happy, they can change careers. And I was so risk averse in my career that I would not have thought that was even in the picture of possibilities, especially when you've got a young family, and we'll get into this later in the book where how do you separate your family responsibilities from your own purpose, because
Yeah.
that is something that I think we still struggle with. I remember going off to work and making a long commute, and I was doing what I needed to do to raise my family and support my family, and that was my job. That was
Hmm.
my role. But purpose is a lot more than that. There's another example in the book where you talk about a man that started a restaurant and grew the restaurant chain, and he had two kids, but those two kids had very different experiences growing up,
They did.
and a lot of it had to do with what they were exposed to and what parent they were exposed to in that process. Let's move on. One of the things you touch on, and this is something from your experience as a hospice doctor, but also something that was in the last book that we talked about. And again, you hit it hard in this book, the life review process. And in each chapter, at the end of each chapter, you have exercises for the reader to go through. And I found, once again, this life review to be very interesting. And as a 61-year-old, I hope I'm not on my deathbed, but I feel like when I go through this mental math and look at the life review, it helps me kind of focus on what am I going to do with the rest of my years?
Yeah, for sure.
Because, we got go-go, slow-go, and no-go years, and I want to stretch out my go-go years as much as possible, but Father Time is coming no matter what. And
I think
that
go ahead.
process, tell us about it. Yeah.
So the life review process is something we do with our hospice patients, and it is a process of asking a bunch of questions about people's life to help them come to terms with their life and their upcoming death. So we ask them about their biggest accomplishments, biggest failures, biggest moments, most important people in their life, things they regret. And for the purpose of figuring out purpose, I really think we should focus on regrets. And this is why. When you're dying, you don't have the energy or time to work on your regrets. And so, in a sense, you really are lacking agency. But what if you started thinking about, well, what would my regret be when I'm dying now when you're young and healthy?
Right. And
Because,
let's break those two type of regrets apart, and let's talk
yeah.
about both kinds.
Yeah, and so there are two type of regrets. I call them, and not only I, Daniel Pink actually is where I got this from. There are action regrets and inaction regrets. So inaction regrets, the kind we often talk about when it comes to purpose, is feeling bad that you didn't do something that was deeply important to you. So a great example for me is I always dreamed of traditionally publishing a book, but for most of my life, I didn't have the courage. And so that was an inaction regret that I would have had if I met my demise 5, 10 years ago. Luckily enough, I recognized that as something that would be a regret, and I turned it into a purpose anchor. I turned it into an inkling, a beckoning of something that would be joyful for me, and then built a life of purpose around it by writing that book and promoting and et cetera, et cetera.
Right,
So
right.
that's inaction regret. Action regret is when you regret something that happened. So, for instance, if I got into a car accident because I was texting and driving and hurt someone, I
Right.
would regret that I took a certain action. The problem with inaction regret, or I'm sorry, the problem with action regret versus inaction regret is you can't undo what's happened already.
Right.
But I would say a lot of times action regret ends up being inaction regret because, for instance, if I was texting and driving and hurt someone, it turns into inaction regret because what I'm really sad about is that I didn't fix it or help it or improve things because of this thing I went through. So I didn't go back and apologize to the person or their family. I didn't educate people more about texting and driving and help them not have the same problems I have. I haven't made right on the wrong. So in a lot of ways, even action regret becomes inaction regret, which means it can become a nucleus of purpose in someone who has time and
Yeah.
agency to start working on these things. So the life review is a great way to start thinking about what you regret, and can you then build a life of purpose around that now and just flip that script?
Right. Time is still on your side. When you've got some road ahead of you, you
Yeah.
can maybe live it.
Yeah, for sure.
So in chapter 4, money can't buy love, purpose, or happiness. We talked earlier about money just being one of the tools in your tool belt. But there was a person in the story, Dietrich, that was kind of set a goal of his net worth and having 25 times his annual spending. He eventually got there, but then what happened?
Well, like many of us, when you make money a goal, the problem is when you get there, you either find that you don't know what to do with yourself because money's kind of a mirage. It's not a thing itself, it's a tool. And so you double down because what else am I going to do? But I made it to 1 million. I'm going to make it to 2 million now, or 3 million, or 50 times instead of
At
25
some
times.
point, yeah, yeah, and you get further into what is it, Kahneman and Deaton's research, where when you get to $75,000, I don't know if this is a magic number or not. What changes? Okay, because that's something that as you're building, as you're gaining some wealth, or let's call it, or income, there's diminishing returns when you get
There
past a
is
certain spot.
the expected utility value of money. So what I always tell people is, look, if you have $0 and you go to $100, that means a huge amount. But if you have $100 million and you go to $101 million, that extra 1 million does almost nothing. So there is decreasing returns the more money you have. And I think that's what Kahneman and Deaton's research was kind of showing. It's like up to $70,000, it makes a huge difference in your life. But once you get past making $70,000 a year, the incremental gains are either not there or very little. Now, I will tell you, we need to keep in mind that Kahneman and Deaton's research was done on data that was collected for something else, and then it was retrospectively combed through to come to these conclusions. So it's
Okay.
not the best version of a study. Now, the guy who followed this up was Killingsworth. In
Right.
2016, Matthew Killingsworth did a little bit better of a study. It was a prospective study. But what he did is he ended up like texting people multiple times a day for months on end and then using that data to come to some conclusions about money and happiness. He came to the conclusion that it wasn't exactly as black and white, that even after 70 or $75,000, more money could bring more happiness to certain people, but not to others,
Right.
and that the amount of increase wasn't as high. And strangely enough, eventually Kahneman and Killingsworth worked together to reimagine all the data and came up with really a similar conclusion to Killingsworth had. Now, I would tell you that that data is just, to me, not amazingly strong. I'm more interested in something that was a much deeper, more profound, and longer study, which is the Harvard Adult Health Study.
Uh huh.
And the Harvard Developmental Adult Health Study actually took Harvard students in the early 1900s, got about 700 or 800 of them, then eventually broadened it to about 1,000 of their family members. Then they brought in a bunch of people in the Boston area as controls, and they studied them for like 80, 90 years. And they started by interviewing them every 2 years. And then eventually, as technology got better, they started doing blood tests, EEGs, MRIs, and they studied the heck out of these people. And at the end of over 80 years of research, they came to the conclusion that the thing most associated with happiness was not money, was
Right.
not career, was not achievements. And I'm going to say something contradictory here, wasn't even purpose. What really brought happiness was interpersonal connections. And here's the thing. I would tell you that purpose is really important because little p purpose actually is a conduit to interpersonal connections. Like when we are involved in little p purpose, it lights us up and we form communities. But I think that when you look at this data all together, you realize that money just isn't that important. And we know this because there's some very low income and low net worth countries where their happiness index is just as high as some of the higher index countries. And there's other studies out there that just point that changing someone's monetary state doesn't really improve their life that much. And so I think it's pretty clear, yes, it's nice to have enough money for the basics, but above and beyond that, I don't know if it makes a huge difference in our life. But clearly purpose does, based on the studies, and clearly interpersonal connections do.
Right, right. Let's talk about some of the tools as we begin to move down the purpose kind of discovery route. There's a concept called the climb, and you also mentioned purpose anchors. This is the process, I guess, is the climb, right? Kind of how do you fit these pieces together? The purpose anchor, the climb, and I like the fact that you can always change,
Yes,
it's okay.
yes.
It's okay to
So
pursue different ones.
there are no rules when it comes to purpose except those little p rules about being process oriented. So your purpose can be lifelong or it can last for a few weeks. You could have one purpose or many versions of purpose. You can have a purpose that immediately impacts people around you, but there's no reason it has to. There are
Right.
no rules. And I always say again, you build purpose, you don't find it, but you do have to get in touch with these inklings, these beckonings of things that light you up. Those are the purpose anchors. And in the book, we go into depth about how you identify those purpose anchors. But once you have those purpose anchors, you actually have to build a life of purpose. And the way you do that is through these climbs. That's creating activities around purpose that fill you up. And so I love to talk about podcasting because this fits perfectly. I always
Right.
say my little p purpose is podcasting. Why? Because when I get in front of the microphone to interview someone for that 1 hour, regardless of what comes of it, I am just happy and joyful and in my state of flow. If 1 million people listen to that episode, great. If no one listens to that episode, it was still a great use of my 1 hour.
Right.
So that's a purpose anchor is podcasting, communicating, but then I had to build a life of purpose around it. That's the climb. That was me starting the Earn and Invest podcast and building the Earn and Invest community. That was very action oriented. I couldn't just identify this thing that lit me up, which was podcasting. I actually had to build a podcast and build a community around it. That I did. Now, I could make a mistake and try to turn podcasting into big P purpose from little P purpose. Let's say I decided that the only way I was going to be happy with podcasting is if I had 1 million downloads every month and then
Right.
started doing things I hated doing to get those downloads, like spending all my time on social media and creating video content, which I'm not interested in, and doing these things I don't like. But I was doing it in service of this big, audacious goal of 1 million
That-
downloads per month.
Right.
I would have
Right.
taken my little P purpose and turned it into a big P purpose. And the truth is, I probably wouldn't enjoy it nearly as much.
No, not at all. Yeah, that's actually really key. Is if the process is not enjoyable, it's
Yeah.
probably not something you need to pursue.
And I can still have this goal of 1 million downloads a month, but if I stop enjoying the process in service of the goal, everything's lost. Now, if I
Right.
love the process and have that goal, and if I get there, great. And if I don't get there, great. Goals aren't bad on their own. It's the relying on them as your version of purpose that becomes an issue.
Yeah, you set that achievement as only that one and only achievement,
Yeah.
and I will be I'm guilty of this in my podcast. Brandon, the mad scientist. Okay, you know him, I'm sure. I feel like my podcast is more like his. I put an episode out when I have something to say. I wish I could be weekly. I wish I could be more routine, but sometimes, I spread it out. I'd like to say I'm going to try to do better in 2025, but whatever brings me, yesterday afternoon or around lunchtime, my daughter and son-in-law bought a house across the freeway from us. So they're just literally across the feeder road, the other neighborhood over there. I went over there and I watched my grandson, our first grandchild, for 2.5, 3 hours. And I'm holding him and I'm thinking, this is little P right here, baby. I am living little P all over the place right now. And that's something that I find a lot of joy in. Okay, let's get into, we kind of skipped ahead here, but we talked about the climb. I want to get kind of into the final parts of the book where we talk a little bit more about the ripple effect. And you hit on a second ago, the connections in the communities, not to let the plot out of the bag, but really it comes down to the connections and communities that really bring you some of the joys and meaning in life and happiness. Ultimately, happiness is what we're talking about.
And impact and legacy. I don't want to leave this out because the biggest argument everyone comes to is like the problem with little P purpose is it's selfish and I want to impact the world and help people and change the world. And so I'm going after big P purpose. And I always tell people, little P purpose actually causes lots of impact and legacy. And that's what a lot of what the last part of the book is about.
Absolutely. I think about when you're a child and you go visit your grandparents, or I can remember going to my grandfather's in Baton Rouge, my mom's side of the family, and he had a lot of carpenters in his family, but he had a lot of carpentry skills. And we always sawed wood and made things with hammers and nails, and the memories associated with those things are tremendous. And to this day, there's a treehouse in my backyard. I built it with my son. These are
And
skills.
that's what you call generational growth. So we talk all the time about generational trauma, those bad things that family members hand down, those bad money scripts and bad trauma scripts, generational trauma. But what you're just giving me a perfect example is generational growth, which means something lit someone up way back in your family's history, and they demonstrated that and did it. They performed their little P purpose because it lit them up, and the people around them were impacted such that they tried on that identity themselves. And for some of them, it stuck. And from generation to generation, this idea of using your hands and building has
Yeah.
continued to pass down long after the people who love doing these things are gone. But not only that, but you with your own hands not only built this treehouse, which your son will always remember and will impact him forever, but my guess is there were kids around the neighborhood who came and climbed in the treehouse and said, boy, I'd like to do something like that. And maybe they learned to build things themselves. Maybe they just had a good time there. Maybe they felt safe and protected. And those kids maybe went out and changed the world themselves. And that is impact and legacy.
Yeah, you just don't know where the ripples are going to go. And when the rock hits the water, it goes in all directions.
And they keep going. And so this sounds very pie in the sky. But again, I can give you tons of examples, and there are tons of examples in the book about exactly how this happens. Roman, the guy I talk about in the beginning of the book, who's the antique store owner, is one of those guys.
Right.
And a really big story I often talk is about my maternal grandfather who loved math. That was his little
Right.
P purpose. And his little P purpose back in the 1950s is still affecting people today, people who have no idea who he is.
Right. And that's the ripple effect. And not only can you not predict where it's going to go, but that ripple changes these other lives and those change other lives. It's not just generational, but it's tangential. And it's amazing. One of the things that I saw in the book, and I struggle with this. This is something you put in there on the personal side. No matter how many times I calculate the numbers and realize that I have enough money to continue living my current life, doubts arise. I'm genetically, or at least generationally, prone to feel the effects of scarcity, even when there are none.
Yeah, that's generational trauma. My grandmother was basically, her mother died in 1917, 1918 from the flu pandemic back then. Her
Wow.
father couldn't manage all the kids. She was put into an adoption agency and basically grew up in an orphanage during the Great Depression. So
Wow.
imagine what she carried with her about scarcity and spending money. And unfortunately, generational trauma, just like generational growth, was passed down to my mom, who had a very scarcity mindset orientation when it came to money. And then my dad died when he was 40. So then that even, made more concrete this idea that money is scarce. And so, yes, I'm genetically bred through
Yeah.
generations to worry about this idea of enough.
Wow. My parents were both born in 1938, and they're both alive. They're 86 years old. I was down there this week, had a few days to spend down there. And my mother, when I walked in, had all of her bills spread across the table and a notebook, and she was paying her bills for the month. And
Yeah.
and I can't tell you how many times growing up she had a spiral notebook. I never looked at it, never knew what it was, but it was like, okay, here's the money coming in, here's the money going out. How are we going to make it work this month?
Yeah.
We had
Yeah.
my dad was the only income earner outside of the house, and mom managed the house. And so that was something that I saw, and I came to realize later as I grew up, that mom's got to do all this. She's taking this stress and making sure all the numbers work. And when you go back to school, you had a new pair of tennis shoes and some new jeans every fall. At Christmas, you might get another pair of tennis shoes because you wore them every day and wore them out.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
But that scarcity mindset sticks in your head. And my wife and I were booking a trip to Nashville a little while ago, and we're going in the spring, and we're trying to travel more. This is one of those things we're working on. But, I look at the schedule and I said, they're having a sale, whether it's $140 early in the day or $180 when it's convenient for us. Let's splurge. Let's travel at 10 in the morning or 1 in the afternoon instead of 6:30 in the morning, because it's not going to move the needle.
And I think part of that process of breaking generational trauma is, obviously there's a part about therapy and meaning and going back to your past to deal with it. But part of it too is investing in purpose. Little P purpose, I really think, helps break some of that generational trauma script. When you start doing things that light you up, you start realizing that money is a tool, and sometimes it's okay to spend a little bit more of that tool to support something that's really meaningful to you, that
if it brings you
fills
joy, I'm a big fan.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit earlier, but the point you made about passing along triumphs instead of traumas,
totally.
I think that one bears saying it over and over. Is there's a lot of great things that you can learn from others around you, and it's not always just the negatives. There's a lot of positives you can glean out of that. I want to talk about one more thing that we maybe touched on with some of the comments earlier, but you talk a little bit about finding the time to pursue all these little P purposes, and I had an example somewhere around here. I've got a cell phone. I get a weekly notice from my phone. It says
how many hours
screen time,
how
right?
many hours?
You know where I'm going with this, don't you?
Yes,
and so
I do.
I'm thinking to myself, self, you're not that bad, are you? and I see a guy that's a little younger than me, a little younger than you, senior pastor up at the church. And I'm thinking, he was looking at his phone. And I'm like, how much screen time do you have every week? And I said, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. And I literally, I was so pissed off. His was half as much as mine. Okay. And I'm like, how much doom scrolling, and I wrote a note down here, particularly like my parents' generation, how much time they spend on their phone doom scrolling or watching a 3-digit TV news network. And what else can they put in their heads? And how do you break them away from that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when it comes to purpose, the two arguments you get is I don't have enough money. And we talked about that earlier, about money is just one tool and you have some tools and levers. The other argument I always get is I don't have enough time. And here's the problem with that. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics does the U.S. time survey every few years. And basically it shows that most people have an average of 5 hours of free time a day, and that the lower socioeconomic classes have a little bit extra.
Right.
And so to argue that you don't have enough time is probably not true. Now, if you are on your phone watching YouTube videos about things that light you up and you feel like that's a good use of your time, and that feels like little P purpose to you, fine. But if you're mindlessly scrolling and trying to co-opt someone else's version of purpose when you're looking at those six-pack abs and those well-dressed people who are traveling to all these different countries and running 8-figure businesses, then you're probably doing yourself a disservice.
Yeah, I hear you. Another thing I discovered, I like to listen to a podcast every now and then when I'm taking a walk. And I was looking to see my dog came in to check on me here a little while ago. But when Bella and I are out on a hike and we're listening to a podcast and they say, hey, it'll be in the show notes if you're out walking your dog. And I'm literally listening to Stacking Benjamins a lot. They always say when you're walking the dog, and I'm literally walking the dog and listening to it. But just setting these smaller purpose anchors and reframing really what a successful happiness trip looks like is something that I think everyone can benefit from. And I think it gives us all permission to say we don't have to have big goals to be happy and to be successful. And as we kind of wrap things up, I think that's probably my biggest revelation from this book is it's okay to have incremental gains as a goal, right? Mm-hmm. That's not a big goal, okay? And you're very careful when you use the word goal because that has connotations. You think the big brass ring at the top of the ladder, right? But we have permission, we have agency to really set these purpose anchors and pursue them in any way we can. And as long as we are pursuing them, we're going to find more happiness in life.
More connections, more interpersonal connections, more happiness, more generational growth, more impact, more legacy.
Right, right. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time. I don't want to cut you off if there's something begging to come out of you. I know you've got a busy day, but is there anything maybe you want to point out that we might didn't cover here related to this book, The Purpose Code?
I want to repeat one important fact. The idea behind this book is that it's abundant and it's easier than you think. So a lot of times people focus on money, and a lot of times people focus on things like financial independence, but don't want to talk about purpose. The reason why is they know the steps to money. We've really articulated those steps well. They're clear. This is how you do it. It may not be easy, but at least you know the steps. Well, the whole idea behind the Purpose Code was to articulate the steps to purpose and make them as clear as it is with money. Like, I want you to be able to read this book and say, aha, this is not confusing anymore. These are the steps. This is how I pursue it. It's abundant. It's easier than you think. You just have to have the courage to take action.
I think taking action, just do it. I can't say that enough times. I think the parallelism you just painted for us between financial success and managing that kind of thing, that's a process. Automate transactions, invest all the time.
Totally.
Let it sit. Don't buy and sell. You can't time the market. Those things are easy. Okay. If we can do that, we can do this,
Very much.
we can find a purpose. And so that gives me energy. That gives me happiness. That gives me excitement, because once you solve one thing, money does not fix the happiness. Okay.
It does not.
It does not make it get better. And there are a lot of things you can do with your money that may bring you some joy. And it can definitely grease the slides a lot.
Yes.
I don't want to diminish it, but once you make enough money to put food on the table and pay your bills and have a comfortable retirement, what are you going to do with yourself?
Yeah.
You got to find the happiness. You got to find the joy. Okay, Jordan. Well, I really appreciate you being here today. I look forward to your book launch, and I wish you tremendous success on that. I will say you have kind of already gotten some traction around this book with some of the user groups and masterminds you've created. And there might be other things that listeners want to learn about you. Where could they best do that?
Best place to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can find links to both my books, Taking Stock and The Purpose Code, as well as all the places I create content, mostly the Earn and Invest podcast and the Purpose Code Substack, but there are also links to my old medical blog and personal finance blogs. Again, that's jordangrumet.com. Check me out.
Sounds great. Sounds great. I'm personally looking forward to digging into some of those archives, because I'd like to read some of your earlier writing, having witnessed some of your later great things that you do and you continue to give to the community. So with that, we appreciate you, Jordan. Thanks a lot for the time. And if you get a chance, get out there and get your copy of The Purpose Code, How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy, by Dr. Jordan Grumet. Thank you.
Another day, another way. Sometimes the song beats the ground. Another day, yet another way. Sometimes the rain falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way. Another day, another way. Sometimes the song just beats the ground. Another day, another way. Sometimes the rain falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way. another way. Sometimes the sun just beats the ground. Another day, another way. Sometimes the rain, it falls on down. Another day, another setting for another way. Sitting on the porch, listening to the rain filter through the trees. Watch it fall to the ground and pools of beer. See the porch light dancing in the drops, hanging from the eaves. And when the colors fill your senses, nothing's far away, nothing's far away, nothing's near. Nothing's far away, nothing's near. Another day, another way, another day, another way. Hold me in the sun, in the rain, baby, baby. I'll do the same.
Episode 19 of the FILIGHTER podcast was recorded Thursday, December 6, 2024.